We all want to feel peace in our lives. Peace in our choices, our beliefs, our relationships, and our environment. I've learned that this desired contentment is often found through holding on to less. When we pare down what we own, what we consume, and what we value, we're left with what's intentional, a personalized curation of what is important and true and useful to us. I'm Shannon Leyko, and you're listening to Paring Down, a podcast aimed at helping you declutter not only your home, but any area of your life that's overwhelming. Here, we're having interesting and honest conversations about the physical and mental clutter that drowns out what truly matters to each of us. And together, we'll learn how to pare it all down, not for the sake of perfection or becoming rigid, rather so we can move through life with less overwhelm and more joy, wisdom, and peace. Welcome back to Paring Down. I think that today's episode is going to be one that the majority of us who have started our decluttering journey, want to start our decluttering journey, did it sometime in the past, have wrestled with, okay? And that is what if items. We have this huge fear of donation regret, which just basically means we don't want to wake up one day and say, I should have kept that. And those big what if items are really why we hold on to so much clutter, right? I think it's the heart of our clutter. Very rarely is it difficult for us to get rid of stuff that we see absolutely no possibility that we're ever going to use again, or things that we really, really hate. Those, yes, we need to get rid of them. Sometimes we just forget that they're there, right? Like we just look at our closet and almost don't see them anymore. So it's not that those things aren't clutter, but they're the easiest things to get rid of. The hardest ones to get rid of are those what if items. And for some of us, almost everything can feel like a what if item. I mean, the funny one that I've brought up a couple times, I feel like recently, is like coffee mugs, right? And you think, what if I have 20 people over for coffee? You're never going to have 20 people over for coffee. Our logical brains know that. I mean, maybe you're one of the few that does. Okay, I mean, live your life. But most of us are not going to have 20 people over for coffee, right? We know that logically. And yet, those what if items are still hard to get rid of. Like our logic seems to not be able to override this fear, this loss aversion is really what it is. There's quite a few reasons why we might be more inclined to hold on to things. It might have to do with our view of our future self. We always think our future self is super amazing. We're going to talk about that. It might have to do with our past. Maybe we've experienced donation regret in the past, but for whatever reason, this is the reason we end up saving the food saver that we got for Christmas 6 years ago, and it's still in the box. And yet we're like, someday I might want to use that food saver. Logically, it's silly. If we haven't used it in the last 6 years, clearly we're not going to use it. But if decluttering was super easy, then I wouldn't have this podcast. So we're going to talk through 5 mindsets today that hopefully will help you part with this big what if roadblock so that you're not as afraid of donation regret and can actually make some progress in your home and enjoy the peace and the lack of stress that comes with having more space and not holding on to all of this stuff. Because that's really the ultimate goal, right? This fear, which is the what if question, is just fear, right? It's holding you back from your ultimate goal, from a calmer, clutter-free home. It's holding you back from walking through your home without seeing piles of stuff that are just reminders that you have things you need to deal with. It's so freeing to walk through your home and not see any of that. So as we dive into these 5 mindset shifts, I want you to keep that ultimate goal in mind of why we're trying to shift our mindset, why it's important to implement these new ways of seeing our stuff, because it's worth it, right? It's worth it in the end. That's why you're listening to this podcast, is you are tired of your house feeling the way that it has felt. And the truth of the matter is this: you cannot live in a home with less stuff and less stress unless you actually declutter some of it. You cannot hold on to every single what if item and achieve the results that you want to see. That it's just not going to happen. It's either or, right? You don't have to get rid of everything, but if you want to have less, you got to get rid of some. And I think sometimes people hope for this magical answer. Yes, you can hold on to all of your what if items and also live in a decluttered home. It's just like, obviously that's just not possible. So let's dive into these 5 mindset shifts that you can make to let go of more of those what if items. The first one is trust your gut, not the fear. That little voice that says, but what if I need it, is not your gut talking. That is your fear trying to pose as your gut, trying to tell you that here are a list of things that could go wrong or a list of random scenarios where you'd really want to have that item. That is just a fear of what could happen in the future. Your gut is when you're like, you know what you use and what you don't. Fear would be, what if I end up going to a country concert, even though I haven't been to one in 15 years and I want to wear my cowboy boots? That is fear. It's not a strong fear. You're not fearing for your life, but it's fear that you're going to wish you had cowboy boots to wear to a concert versus your gut telling you, I don't go to concerts. I don't go to country concerts anymore. Or if I went to a country concert, I can wear a pair of sneaks and be completely fine and still look cute. So if your first instinct is to trust your fear, then you're moving in the wrong direction. Learn to trust your gut over your fear. I'm going to bring up a psych study because I am who I am. Okay. I love psychology. And I think it's interesting to learn how these very controlled studies actually back up why we should or shouldn't be making the decisions that we do. At least for me, it's nice to know that there's like proof, even though, there's no such thing as proof in psychology, but like there's supported evidence that I'm making the right choice to trust my gut or whatever it might be. So let's talk about the Iowa gambling task, which was a study that demonstrates how intuition does guide our decision making. I love intuition. In fact, my poor husband, but not my poor husband. I remember telling him before we got married, like, you will not get away with anything being married to me. Okay. I not only trust my intuition, but because I trust it, I have honed it over the years and I am scary with it. I believe in intuition, especially women's intuition, so deeply that I've come to really trust my own, not only when it comes to decluttering, but when it comes to relationships or anything in life. And I trust it more than I trust what anyone else says. You can't tell me something, and if my intuition goes against it, I promise you, I believe my intuition over you. Sorry. She is my best friend. And I'm totally going off topic, but at least hopefully it's entertaining for you. It is not that I like falsely accuse people of anything. That's because I have good intuition. If I'm going to be feeling a certain way, some kind of way about a situation, I know it's a fact. So I have a very trusting relationship with my husband. So I've never had my intuition tell me, well, not never. Do you guys want to hear a juicy story? Should we pause on decluttering for just a second? I'll tell you like a juicy marriage story. I'm going to do it. So we were like less than a year into our marriage. I think, in fact, we were only a couple months into our marriage. And my husband and I did not date for very long before we got engaged. We only dated for 2 months, like absolute psychopaths. And then we got married 4 months after that. So we we basically went from dating to married in 6 months. And it's not like we'd been friends. No. We had met 1 month before we started dating, but we didn't talk in that month. It's kind of a long story. We didn't live in the same place. And then I moved to where he lived, not for him. And when I moved there, that's when he asked me out on a date. So anyways, the point is, it's not like we knew each other for years as friends before we started dating. Like, this was a stranger, barely knew his middle name, we got married. But again, I trust my intuition, when you know, and I trusted who he was. And we had a lot of hard conversations too. Intuition isn't just like not getting the facts, right, at all. But okay, so we got married. He goes out to sea. He's in the Coast Guard. He gets assigned to a ship and he's gone for 3 months or 2 months at a time. And then he'd come home for 2 months, leave for 2 months. It was a real fun schedule. So he's out on the ship. I have a lot of flexibility in my life at this point. And so I get in my little car and I was like, I'll drive up the East Coast, because he was doing fisheries. Like, they were making sure people in the New England area weren't, trolling or whatever it's called. They weren't doing bad fisherman things. I'm so great at explaining this. So I drive up, and one of the ports was in Portland, Oregon. I think that's where we were. Not Oregon. What am I talking about? Portland, Maine. Sorry. And so I meet him at where the ship had pulled in, because they get off the boat for 2 or 3 days at a time. And so I was basically following them in my car up the East Coast, and then I'd meet them wherever the boat pulled in. And so anyway, he had a lot of female coworkers, which I'm fine with, because again, I trust my husband and I trust my intuition. And there was no, I said intuition, weird. Let's just pretend I didn't. And there was no reason why I wouldn't trust him working with other women, right? It's fine. So he had always told stories about different women on the boat that I had never met, and never did alarm bells go off. So then he randomly told me on the phone, or even maybe it was just via email. And he told me about a new coworker on the boat. And he was just telling a story. And he's like, oh, yeah, and so, she's new, explained why she was new, and like went about his story. And I cannot tell you why, other than my intuition is gold. I was like, that one's different. There's something there that isn't entirely great. Not that I didn't trust my husband. I didn't think anything weird was going on, but I was just like, there's something off here, which again was weird because this is not the first time he's brought up a woman in a story, right? So I get to Portland and we go out to dinner and he gets a text message and it's an emoji. And I was like, hey, because I saw it. It was on the bar, like in between us. And so I glanced over, I see multiple emojis. And I was like, oh, who's texting you? And he was like, it's so-and-so from the ship, this girl. And I was like, oh, why is she texting you? Like, why does she even have your phone number? And he was like, oh, she was going to see if you could give her a ride to the airport since you have your car here and she's getting off the ship this week. And I was like, first of all, no, I've been living out of my car for a month, chasing you up the East Coast. There's no room for another human in it. Also, I feel like she wants me to give her a ride when the rest of the people leaving the ship are all taking Ubers together. She wants to meet me. And he was like, why would she want to meet you? And I was like, well, I get this weird feeling that there's something else going on here with her. And she would like to meet the woman who is married to the guy she has a crush on. And he was like, well, that's silly. And I was like, well, let's think about it. Has anything interesting happened on the ship that would make you think something? And at first, of course, he was really hesitant because he thought he was going to like get in trouble. I was like, I'm not mad at you, but something's off here. And lo and behold, he ends up telling me like 2 stories of when she was definitely low key hitting on him. He didn't do anything wrong, but there were some things that were probably not the most appropriate that she did. And so I was like, see, like my intuition's really, really good. And he laughed. He was like, yep, we're a couple months into marriage and you have proven your point that you will always know. All right. So that's your juicy marriage story. I'm sorry I can't get into more details because I don't want to like reveal her identity somehow, if his like old coworkers or something listens to this. But yeah, my intuition's really good. And that to be said, I can apply that to decluttering. Okay. You're welcome for the marriage story. Let's get back to decluttering. But our intuition matters because it's real. We know when we should keep something. We know when something is going on that shouldn't. We know when we should be nervous versus when we shouldn't. And those telltale signs are called somatic markers. We can get better at recognizing a change in our heart rate or sweating or those alarm bells going off, even if we're not like sweating through our shirt. Like I trust my gut. When something goes wrong, there are somatic markers that tell me something is off here. And that can apply to even to decluttering. But let's go back to the Iowa gambling task that demonstrates this in a more controlled setting than a Coast Guard ship. So what the researchers did is they presented the folks in the study with 4 stacks of cards on a computer screen. Like if you've ever played solitaire on your computer, whatever. So there's like 4 stacks on a computer screen. And each time they turned a card, they would receive either a monetary reward or a penalty, taking away money. So 2 of the decks, they would tend to, not every time, but they would tend to offer relatively large rewards. So that's exciting, but even bigger penalties. Meaning that over the course of their turns, if they kept choosing those cards, it would lead to a loss. The other 2 decks, they provided relatively small rewards, but also smaller penalties, meaning that they were the safer option. The participants were not told which decks were going to be more profitable in the long term, but after about 40 attempts, many people started to form a hunch of which ones would lead to bigger wins. And they were going off of this hunch before they were able to actually identify why they were choosing something. They didn't know why. They were just like, I just have a feeling. Researchers also then noted their physiological signals, those somatic markers I mentioned, so the heart rate, the sweating, whatever, that are warning against risky choices. So people who lack these gut instincts, like certain neurological patients that maybe they don't have those somatic markers that go off, they struggle more with decision making and they often overanalyze or fail to recognize the risks. All of this research put together highlights that intuition is actually a critical tool for making sound decisions in everyday life. If we are not following intuition, we will make poorer choices. So how does this research on intuition directly apply to decluttering? Well, the first is obvious, right? Like, trust your gut. You know what you use and you know what you don't. Just like in the Iowa gambling task, your subconscious is already aware of patterns, which items you pick up, which ones just take up space. If you hesitate over an item, but you feel a sense of relief imagining that it's gone, that's your gut telling you that it's time to let it go. But then that little devil on your shoulder seeps in and says, what if you end up needing it, right? And that's your fear. And that can be louder, but that initial gut instinct knows that it's time to let that thing go. And ignoring that instinct will, of course, lead up to more clutter, buildup, and decision fatigue. The second way your intuition applies to clutter is those somatic markers. Let those guide you. You can get in tune with your body to give you clues as to what item is clutter. You can start to feel what causes stress or guilt or tension when I look at it. Maybe think of like an expensive gadget that you rarely use or never use, or a pair of jeans that no longer fit. Your body will tell you, oh, like there's a negative feeling here. And that is a sign that it's not adding value to your life. You're holding on to it for the fear. What if I can fit into those jeans again someday? What if I really want to use that gadget and I can't afford to buy it again in the future? That's when those what ifs come in. But your gut reaction, your somatic markers are telling you, get this out of my space. It's stressing me out. It's making me feel bad about myself. So trust these emotional and physical responses that can help you declutter more efficiently. And remind yourself of this too, that if you're experiencing analysis paralysis, basically you're overanalyzing and getting really caught up in those what if questions, that's a good sign you're not in tune with your intuition. Like I said, you don't know your somatic markers. You don't listen to yourself. You're not listening to that gut instinct. And I'm not saying don't make wise choices. I want you to make wise choices. We're not getting rid of everything. If you are on your path to losing weight and you have a pair of jeans you absolutely love that are only one size, maybe two sizes too small, hold on to that one pair of jeans. Just don't hold on to all of it. But use that analysis paralysis as proof to yourself that you're not trusting your intuition, and know that intuition is so important and you want to build that muscle. Okay, mindset shift number 2 to get past these what if items. Future you does not want it either. Listen, I love future Shannon. I am always thinking about future me. How can I help her out? But the dark side of our future selves is that they're always way more mature and motivated than current us, right? We imagine that future us will have this like sudden burning need for the thing we're about to donate. In my husband's case, like he always believes future him will be dancing in an 80s outfit instead of putting the kids to bed. Or maybe you're this future mystical creature, this idealized version of yourself who goes on runs 3 mornings a week and who brushes her dog in between grooming visits. Obviously talking about myself here. Future you looks really cute when she takes the kids to swim class, and she might even throw on a pair of heels just to go to church. That's future Shannon. But future Shannon's not real, okay? Future Shannon, like I said, she's a mystical creature. Those things will not happen. Do you know the real future Shannon? The real future Shannon wants a clean, calm, open space that doesn't drive her crazy every single day. She wants to be able to find her keys without a search party. She is tired of her junk, and she feels the way you do right now, which is she just doesn't want the stuff everywhere. So if we're going to be taking care of our future selves, we actually should be thinking about the stuff that's driving us crazy right now, because that's going to drive us crazy in the future, not the stuff that an idealized version of ourselves will use down the line. And this concept of not getting caught up in what our future self could possibly need, like these obscure scenarios, is related to delayed gratification. You guys have probably heard of the Stanford marshmallow experiment. It's super interesting research on delayed gratification. And it shows that those who prioritize future benefits over immediate rewards tend to be more successful and satisfied in life, right? So this future benefit of living with less stress versus the immediate reward of tending to our fear of saying, oh, I'm going to hold on to this in case that happens. It makes us feel more secure in the moment, but overall, it makes us way more stressed out, right? We want to end up more successful and satisfied. Let me tell you about the Stanford marshmallow experiment if you have not heard about it. So it was conducted by a psychologist named Walter Mischel in the 1970s, and it involved offering preschoolers a choice between one marshmallow immediately or two marshmallows if they waited. So the results were that the children who waited longer for a second marshmallow ended up having higher SAT scores in high school. They had better social and cognitive functioning in adolescence. They had a lower BMI, which, I mean, I don't really care about that, whatever, but they had a lower BMI in their 20s, and they pursued their goals more effectively throughout life. They were go-getters, and they were more likely to finish college and earn higher incomes. Isn't that wild? Based on I have two preschoolers currently, a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. And I don't know, should I do the marshmallow test with them and come back to you next week? I'll do it. I'm going to do the marshmallow test. I can't promise it'll be with marshmallows, but I'll do it with I don't know, Girl Scout cookies or something, and let you know what happens. And then we can psychoanalyze my children together and decide if they are going to be successful in life. And then in 15 years, when you guys are still here listening to Paring Down, then I'll let you know how it goes. Anyway, so the idea though is that this test in preschool can tell us about the success of someone. Isn't that interesting? So the things in life that bring us immediate gratification, like marshmallows, or even, drugs, gambling, outbursts from anger that release from us, right? Like yelling or using our credit cards, right? They don't necessarily bring out the best in us. They just ease our discomfort for the moment. But ultimately, we're not going to see the results we want to see. We are not going to be as successful. We are not going to get more in the good amount of more. So this study obviously doesn't relate to decluttering, but it relates to the importance of delayed gratification. We're resisting immediate temptations when we are decluttering. You have to resist the urge to hold on to the items because they give you a sense of immediate comfort or nostalgia. We're resisting that immediate pleasure for a greater long-term benefit. By giving up the things you don't truly need right now, you're setting yourself up for a more organized and peaceful living space in the future. Delayed gratification also applies to decluttering because decluttering is often a process. It takes time and requires sustained effort. Getting rid of that blender that you may or may not ever use is not going to immediately make your life more calm, right? You have to consistently get rid of a large amount of things over and over again until your house begins to feel different. So again, that's delayed gratification. The immediate satisfaction of getting rid of things may not be as rewarding as the long-term satisfaction of having a cleaner, more organized space that contributes to that mental clarity and productivity and overall well-being. And of course, this all just relates back to intentionality. So for delayed gratification, you're thinking carefully about if what you would do in this moment really makes sense for your life. That's not what the 4-year-olds were thinking with the marshmallows, but they kind of were. They're like, is this worth it? And so when we're decluttering, this means thinking carefully about whether each item really does add value to your life. You're thinking intentionally by way of rejecting short-term pleasure for the long-term benefit. Hey guys, it's time for your ad break. Each week I like to say a huge thank you for your graciousness that these are part of the podcast. Here we go. Mindset shift number 3. You can replace it. With the exception of sentimental items, it's not gone forever. And I'm not talking about doing decluttering in a super privileged way. You heard me, 2 episodes ago on a little bit of a rant about the 2020 rule, which I think is an unhealthy view of how we can reacquire stuff that we declutter. So let me get that one out of the way. I'm not going to go on the full rant again, but basically some people say if it costs less than $20 and can be replaced in 20 minutes, let it go when it comes to these what if items. I get the sentiment, but I don't really agree with it. Yes, most of the things we're scared to donate fall into this category. So it makes things easier to part with when you're like, okay, worst case scenario, I can get this again for $20. It won't take me long to get it. I can order it on Amazon or find it in a thrift store or whatever. That said, I don't think the 2020 rule really accounts for privilege because I happen to think $20 is a lot of money. I also think we need to be extremely mindful about our consumption. So if we're feeding the market for new materials repeatedly, it's terrible for the planet, among other things. So I do respect holding on to things so we don't have to replace them. But the spirit here is to remember that you're not stuck with your choice forever. Because ultimately, you're not going to need to replace the vast majority of things that you're getting rid of. I cannot think of a time, I really can't, that I've decluttered something that I have ended up needing. You might be able to identify a time, maybe once, maybe twice, but that's also the negativity bias at play, which means that negative experiences or events tend to have a stronger impact on your thoughts, feelings, or memories than positive or neutral experiences, right? So we're more likely to remember or focus on that one or two times that you regretted getting rid of something instead of the hundreds of times you've donated or trashed something and never thought about it again. And you can often reacquire things secondhand or makeshift, right? Like a vase, you can just choose, you have a jar, right? That sometimes you make sourdough in. And when you're not making sourdough and that one random time that you get flowers, you put the flowers in the vase or the jar. You can borrow things, right? I have two examples that come to mind. Both are from camping when it is not as easy to reacquire something if you just left something at home and you're at a campsite. So one time we left our wine key. God forbid we left the wine key at home. And so we had a bottle of wine and no way to open it. And I was like, why don't we go ask one of our camping neighbors? My husband, he's more of a makeshift guy. I think it's like fun for him to MacGyver things. And he took this air pump we have for tires and somehow like pumped the cork out of the wine bottle. It was really fun and exciting, truly. Like I screamed with joy when it happened because it was very dramatic. It like went out with a big pop. But anyway, he made it work. Okay. You can make it work. I don't think that you should have to do that every time you want to open a bottle of wine, own a wine key. The point, the spirit of this is in the rare occasion that you might need something, you can likely makeshift it, because you're not going to be using it regularly enough, like a wine key or something. It's something that you rarely need. And so if that scenario happens, you can probably come up with something else. Another camping story. We left our lighter for the campfire at home. We get there, we have no way to make a fire, which is no bueno when you're camping, no s'mores. Dinner was hot dogs. I'm not eating a cold hot dog. And then we'd be cold and have no light outside. And we'd all have to get in the van or your tent if you are a tent camper. We have a camper van we live in down by the river. We don't actually live in it. But yeah. So anyways, it would be miserable, right? Because it gets dark. It got dark at like 5:30 that night. It was, it was a winterish kind of a camping situation. And so we needed fire. And my son, my 7-year-old, had met a little buddy that lived a couple campsites away. And we did end up borrowing that time their lighter and said, hey, can we borrow your lighter? That happens in real life too, not just in camping. If you need something, you can ask your neighbor. You can ask your friends. It is amazing. My daughter did not have a winter coat this winter because hers from the previous year she had outgrown. And we were going to Ohio for Thanksgiving. And I just asked a couple of my friends, anyone have a coat Joe can borrow? I had like 3 on my doorstep by the time I left. You don't have to keep the things that you use rarely, those what if items. I promise you, life will come through for you. Life will show up. Let it go. It's okay. Mindset number 4. I touched on those sentimental items, so let's talk about them. This is less of what if I need it on a practical level. It's more, what if I regret getting rid of it because I need it on an emotional level? I do have a whole podcast episode about sentimental items, episode 5. I think most of you have listened to it. It's one of my more popular episodes. It's very short. I think it's like 22 minutes long. But if you want to look it up, it's episode 5, sentimental items. And it's all about sentimentality because it's a lot to dive into. I didn't even cover it all in that episode, but there's nuance to different kinds of sentimental items. So there's no exact right answer of what is worth keeping. But the big thing I want you to remember here when it comes to the fear of donation regret because of what you're parting with being sentimental is to consider that whatever nostalgia that item brings up for you doesn't disappear with the item. I'm not telling you to get rid of all of your sentimental items. I'll talk about here in a second the ones I think you should focus on getting rid of. But generally speaking, our child will still have been a baby, and many of our memories with them just exist in our head. Our mom who passed away was still our mom. The vacation we took still happened. For some reason, we just feel like these things weren't real unless we have a tangible thing in front of us representing them. But that's not how life works. You might not remember every last detail, which, by the way, you won't, even if you look at the outfit your baby wore when they were a baby. It won't conjure every last memory of them, right? But I think the most beautiful thing about the way life works and nostalgia is that our past experiences, both good and bad, really shape who we are today. I don't remember every memory with my mom, but I am who I am. So much of it is because of the things that were instilled in me that I can't even identify exactly, or the memories I had with my mom. They're part of who I am. I think we need to remember that we embody anything that's nostalgic in our life through our behaviors, our values, how we show up in the world, the way that we love. And remember that we don't need to remember every detail of those things for our life or other people's lives to have mattered. Because if you think about all the billions of people who have died and we don't know them or we don't remember them, right? Most of us can't name our great grandma, but her life mattered. And that was before they had a million pictures they could take all the time. And she didn't love her children any less or miss her loved ones any less by not having the same level of sentimental items that we're able to hold on to today. So I think that's a really important piece to remember. But when it comes to letting go of sentimental items in that big what if, I would just focus first on the items that don't really represent like a lost loved one, right? That's a really intense sentimental item. There are more types of sentimental items that represent a period of time in life, maybe like souvenirs from a trip, an old high school t-shirt, yearbooks, that kind of thing. Those are a little bit easier to let go of because you don't really need those on an emotional level to remember your mom, right? Like remembering high school's fun, but it's not a game changer for your life. And I told this story before, but like I found that I don't have the best memories sometimes when I look at certain yearbooks. And I was like, why am I holding on to this? I don't need to keep this big book for this one picture of me in middle school. Like I have that somewhere else, like in a 5x7. I don't need the whole book reminding me that I ate lunch in the bathroom by myself when I was in 7th grade. It didn't actually feel good. So consider that when getting rid of those what if sentimental items. And for more precious items like your kids' school papers or their clothing or someone who passed away gave you things, I would focus more on holding on to some of it, not all of it. So let's take kids' school papers. I don't get rid of it all either. I want to remember that developmental stage of when they wrote really adorable stories or drew really adorable pictures, or they put their sweet little hands that will never be the same size as that again on a piece of paper. I respect that and I value those kinds of sentimental items. Let's just not keep all of them. A physical boundary is something I bring up a lot because I think it's a really powerful tool to remind us that we can keep some things in a form that's not clutter, but if we keep all of it, then it's clutter. So I've shared this before, but I have a box where I keep my kids' school stuff. They have one folder per year, like a file box. And that's my physical boundary. And beyond that, I even try and keep it to maybe 5 things per year because that'll add up, right? 5 times 12, that's 60 things that I'll have from their like kind of schoolwork as they grow up. It probably will be a little bit more than that, right? But 60 to 100 things is plenty. We don't want thousands. We'll never go through it. We'll never appreciate it. So if you think, oh, what if I really am going to want this in the future? Keep it, but don't keep all of it. And by the way, I'll put the link for the little schoolwork box in the show notes of this episode if you want to get one for yourself. I get it from a fellow Coast Guard wife who makes them on Etsy. Okay, number 5, the last mindset shift today to help you get past this what if I end up needing it roadblock is to donate for the greater good. Instead of focusing on what if I end up needing it, think, what if this ends up really helping someone else who needs it more? The things you're holding on to out of fear could be exactly what somebody else needs. And it's really hard to have donation regret when you let yourself focus on the way that this is benefiting somebody else. I know that there's the argument that like, oh, if you take it to Goodwill, the odds of it getting to someone who actually needs it are super low. And then I'm a perfectionist about where it goes because I don't want to take it to Goodwill. And so then it stays in my guest room forever because I can't figure out where else to take it. I'm always a big fan of not letting perfection be the enemy of good. I think we should adopt an optimistic outlook. If you take something to Goodwill First of all, you're doing future you a favor. You're moving in the right direction. You're reevaluating your stuff, which is going to affect your consumption level in the future because you're not going to want to buy stuff that's going to become clutter again, right? So this is changing your whole life moving forward in a really positive way. So there's already so many benefits. But beyond that, why not adopt the optimistic outlook that it could help someone? It has a much better chance of helping somebody else in life if you drop it off at Goodwill than it does sitting in your guest room or in your garage. So when I drop things off at Goodwill, I choose to believe that it's going to go somewhere that it's needed. Anything you do a lot becomes easier. So it's not as much of a heavy lift for me to find other opportunities and ways to donate. But if you're starting out and Goodwill is the easiest way for it to actually get out of your house, take it there and trust that it's going to go somewhere good. Just tell yourself that it is. And then when you do that more and more, you'll be used to taking things out of your house. It's not going to be as much of a heavy lift. Decluttering is not as hard. Therefore, you can start looking into other options, consignment stores, women's shelters, whatever it might be. If you want to do that from the beginning to make it easier for yourself to declutter because you know it's going somewhere good, do that too. But I think it's a fine line of those of us who we think we want to choose the better option, but we don't want to put in the effort, or we just don't have that in us to put in the effort to find the better option from the get-go. And if that's you, if you're like me, that's how I was, just go ahead and do the easiest option and choose to be optimistic about it and trust that as your decluttering journey goes along, you will find more energy, effort, and ability to identify even better ways to donate. So this mindset shift here is that your stuff, what if it ends up helping someone else? Instead of what if I end up needing it, just take that same question, state the what if question and say, what if this really benefits somebody else? And let that guide you and motivate you to get rid of some stuff. So listen, if you do end up getting that pang of regret, this is your reminder not to panic, not to be like, Shannon told me to get rid of it. Now I need it. No, you can makeshift, you can borrow. And it's okay if occasionally, very, very rarely, again, this has never happened to me, you have to replace something. The good that you've done by getting your house in order and changing your consumption habits moving forward for the sake of your pocketbook and the planet and all of the good things that come from decluttering far outweighs whatever random item that you maybe might have to buy again down the line. But again, I really don't think that happens very often. That's the negativity bias talking to you. It is easier to focus on the 1 or 2 times that this happens and forget about the rest of the time that it doesn't happen. So there you have it. Donation regret is just a sneaky little fear keeping you from the peace and space that you truly crave. The ultimate goal of decluttering is not just like this Pinterest perfect home. I mean, that's a bonus. It's a byproduct, is that your house will look nicer, but it's about releasing the stress that is tied to all of this stuff. And if you want to get rid of that stress and get rid of that stuff, you actually have to get rid of that stuff, those what if items. So trust your gut, not your fear. Remember that future you doesn't want it either. Remind yourself you can replace it or makeshift it. Separate nostalgia and sentiment from stuff. And remember, you don't have to keep it all to keep the sentimental items. And finally, instead of thinking, what if I end up needing it? Think, what if this ends up helping somebody else? All right, I hope this helps you on your decluttering journey with that massive roadblock that so many of us face with what if items and the fear of donation regret. Thank you as always for being here, and I will see you next week. Bye. You just listened to an episode of Paring Down with me, Shannon Leyko. If you enjoyed the show, it would mean the world if you can leave a review wherever you listen and share this episode with a friend. Those reviews really are what keeps a podcast on its feet for the long haul, and I will read every single one with a huge smile on my face. So thank you ahead of time. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe. Also, be sure to follow along on Instagram at paring_down, where I offer lots of tips and inspiration for paring down, along with what's new here on the podcast. Till next time.